Can urolithin A supplements boost the immune system and battle cancer? I know sounds fantastic, but there aren't researchers actually talking about this, so let's look at the proof. And recall that urolithin A is a byproduct where the gut microbiome acts on specific food products called polyphenols, specifically compounds like ellagic acid, to produce urolithin A. In other words, we don't make urolithin A directly, rather it's a metabolite that is produced when our gut microbiome acts on ellagic acid and other polyphenols. Food sources of these urolithin A precursors include pomegranates, strawberries, blackberries, walnuts, and several other foods. One of the ways that urolithin A is supposed to work is by improving the health of the mitochondria by getting rid of and recycling old worn out mitochondria in a process that's technically called mitophagy. Other lines of research suggest that this metabolite may also work through other mechanisms, like for example reducing inflammation as well. Fun fact, there are many types of urolithins. Currently, urolithin A gets the lion's share of attention in the research community. However, I would not be surprised if one day researchers started talking about the health effects of the other urolithins. I also want to point something out. If you've been researching this topic for yourself, you may have come across claims that only about 40% of people are naturally able to convert polyphenols into urolithin A. And that's an interesting claim, because if we look at this study where they looked at Caucasian people from ages 5 to 90, they state that about 10% of people don't make urolithin A, which means that about 90% of us do. In other studies, it's been suggested that as many as 40% of older folks may not produce urolithin A naturally, but that does not necessarily mean that getting older means that this production needs to decrease. Rather, it could simply be a result that as we get older, we may eat fewer of the foods that are necessary to make urolithin A. So in other words, what I'm getting at here is if you hear that 40% statistic, take it with a grain of salt. Okay, so what is the proof that urolithin A supplements can help the immune system and battle cancer? So there's this study that found that urolithin A helped to create stronger, longer-lasting cancer-fighting T cells in mice, which could make future cancer immunotherapy work better. Now, on the plus side, they gave the urolithin orally to the mice, which is a good thing, but at the end of the day, we're not mice, so let's move on. These researchers wanted to see if urolithin A could slow the progression of pancreatic cancer, and it actually seemed to in mice that had tumors of the pancreas. Again, that's nice, but what we really need are human randomized controlled trials, which brings us to this study, the effect of the mitophagy inducer urolithin A on age-related immune decline, a randomized placebo-controlled trial. 25 men and women take 1,000 milligrams of urolithin A or a placebo for 28 days to see what its effects would be on the immune system and systemic inflammation. A month later, researchers report that they saw changes in certain immune cells that could suggest a more youthful and efficient immune profile, but these were based on laboratory immune markers. In other words, the study didn't prove that taking urolithin A supplements made these people any healthier or battled colds and flus or led to fewer sick days, which would be more meaningful outcomes for most people. And to be fair, these researchers actually weren't looking at those metrics. They also reported that urolithin A supplements significantly reduced interleukin-2, that's a signaling molecule. And while it's true you didn't see that in people who took a placebo, but what the reduction in interleukin-2 means for real-world meaningful health outcomes is unclear. On the plus side, however, urolithin A did not raise markers of inflammation, and that's good. Okay, so here's a few things to know about this paper. Number one, it involved a small group of healthy people. In other words, none of these people had cancer. They took 1,000 milligrams a day, which comes to about 2 capsules daily, according to the supplement facts labels of many urolithin A supplements that I saw online. And I bring that up because most of these supplements are pretty expensive, so by taking 2 supplements a day, you're spending more money. This study involved the use of the Mitopure urolithin A brand supplement, and this study was also funded by the Mitopure company, and several authors of this study also had ties to the company. Now, that doesn't validate the results of this study, but I wanted to point it out in case anyone asks. So what does all this mean? So I've previously covered a lot of the research on urolithin urolithin A in a separate video, and I'll link to that below if you want to learn more about that. But as for Mitopure or any urolithin A supplement improving the immune system of people with cancer, that evidence is not there yet. I'm unaware of any clinical trial where people with cancer were given urolithin A supplements to see what happened. Admittedly, a study like that would be difficult to get past an IRB, but that's the kind of research that's needed. Currently, there's no clinical evidence showing that urolithin A battles cancer in humans or reduces the risk of people getting cancer. It is worth noting to point out that several studies have shown the anti-cancer and immune system benefits of exercise and eating a more plant-based diet. Based on that, it's probably best to do those other things too, rather than put all your eggs in the urolithin A basket. If you want to support my independent research like this, buy me a coffee. The link is below, and until next time, take care out there.